Okay, good evening, everybody. Just giving us a couple of seconds to get everything started. We'll be with you shortly. Okay. All right. Okay, good evening, everybody. It is an absolute pleasure to be having with us this evening Combatants for Peace with Suleiman Khatib, who is joining us from Ramallah, I think, because that's what your name says, and Tuli, one of his partners from Combatants for Peace. We will hear from them shortly, but before I do so, I'd like to hand over to Rabbi Kamens to do acknowledgement of country.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Krebs, and welcome one and all. I have to just acknowledge it's a great, privilege to be able to see, along with Rabbi Krebs, people that we met from Combatants for Peace in January of 2016 on our interfaith tour there with the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies Uniting Church and Inner West Havurah. It was a very deep and meaningful time, and I think tonight will be as well. So with those thoughts, we do acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which most of us gather. So in the eastern suburbs, the Gadigal clan of the Eora Nation, and in the lower North Shore, the Camaragal people, and in the further north, the Durham-Aragal people. We acknowledge that over time, European settlement intentionally and consequentially displaced these and other indigenous peoples from their land, disempowered them, and greatly destroyed their culture. So we acknowledge that to heal the wounds of the First Nations of this land, we must empower their voice within the Australian Constitution, learn the truth of our intertwined history over these last 250 years, and reach treaties to share equitably the bounty of the land. May we walk together toward the future.
Thank you, Rabbi Kamens. So it gives me great pleasure. So over the last 5 weeks, we have been dealing and delving into this big question of, is peace possible? And we've dealt with 4 organizations so far that have showed us grassroots organizations really trying to bring Palestinians and Israelis face to face to show and try offer alternatives to the failures that we've seen in the political system, on both sides of the political divide. This evening, we are welcoming our 5th organization. This will conclude the series, at least for now. And Combatants for Peace, Rabbi Kamens and myself, as you mentioned earlier, on a cold winter's night in January 2017, we were in Bethlehem, where we met Suleiman and told us a story of people who, as I'm sure many of you saw the logo of Combatants for Peace, people who had taken up arms against the enemy, on both sides of the divide, Israelis against Palestinians who were the enemy, and Palestinians with Israelis as the enemy. And Suleiman had done, a lot of soul searching and came and brought us his story of realizing that violence is not the way forward and non-violence is the only key. And it's taken a number of weeks to get this sorted, but without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Suleiman and to Tuli Flint, who's with us as well, who will share their story. So I hand over to Suleiman.
Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you, Emmanuel. Jeffrey, and Tuli is here. I just want to make sure you see him.
Yeah.
Tuli, can you? Okay.
Yeah, we got him.
Always Palestinian on time, Israel is always late, just Thank you. So I guess we will do like 15 minutes something each of personal stories. So then we'll tell you a bit more also about Combatants for Peace. And of course, the timing is maybe interesting now under the corona, but also the annexation and everything's happening. So I guess this will be like an interesting conversation. Just want to make sure the technical is working. Do you hear me well? Just
everything good.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm speaking to you from Ramallah, where I live, but I am born around Jerusalem in a village called Hizma. And I really like the introduction talking about the indigenous life and people in Australia and the culture, because with the differences, there is also some similarities here. Of course, maybe the question of who's indigenous here is very, very complex, maybe question for some people. But in my case, personally, I like to make it more personal. I come from an indigenous community. My village has been there for thousands of years, and my family has been living in the same village for ever since they remember. And in that cultural context, maybe because I've been in Australia one time, so I'm a little bit aware of the white indigenous complexes there. You know, we have 2-3 families in my village, Palestinian families, that moved to my village maybe a century ago. So my aunt, and she's now almost 90 years old, these are foreigners. They're not local from our village because they just came 3, 4, 5 generations ago. So this is really important in the bigger context, in the conflict here and elsewhere, I guess. I grew up in Jerusalem, around Jerusalem. My father was working in Jerusalem municipality, also spoke Hebrew. His generation maybe had more interaction with different communities like, you know, Muslim, Jewish, Christian communities around Jerusalem compared to the younger generation right now. So just to make I have a long story with the conflict, but I try to make it short. And of course, afterwards, you feel free to ask anything and not to agree also. That's also fine. So my connection directly to the conflict, aside of born there in Jerusalem area and seeing like the tension around there, my older brother was active and he was in jail. He was studying in the oldest school in East Jerusalem called Rajdiya, which is the oldest school in East Jerusalem. And like many Palestinians, unfortunately, like you end up in jail. That's like a normal thing happen and in this context as political prisoners. And myself also, I've been you know, grew up in a family that really honor the land, and my family owned a lot of land from my ancestors, from my grandfather and so on. And so I grew up, you know, like in my mom generation, the life was more natural, let's say, like waking up in the sunrise and going to the trees and work the land around the trees. And we used to have sheep, and so I played the flute, which is connected to the Palestinian folklore and the local culture. And even the dress, like my mom still wear the Palestinian or local dress of Jerusalem Mountain, which is different than, let's say, Hebron Mountains or Bethlehem or other areas. So this is very important just to say that the culture that I grew up with is very close to the nature, and even the spiritual part, of course. But the city where we have our daily life was Jerusalem. So in my school was under Israeli control. I'm talking about the 80s, so I'm older than I look. So at that time, like all the schools were under Israeli control, which means no political of anything like in the school. So in my time, like you would not be able to use the word Palestine, for example. This was illegal. You can go to jail for Palestinian flag or writing anything on the wall of the school, bringing politics. So myself and a few other like kids has started like doing activism in the school, you know, writing graffiti or like raising the Palestinian flag on the, what you call it in English, like the electricity lines. And, you know, I did everything when I was 14, like 13 and a half, 14, I became very active compared to my generation. Means I was drawn, like Rabbi Gad spoke about violence to non-violence. At that time, for me and for maybe others, I was drawn to what we call in our narrative, since we talk about different narratives here, armed struggle. A duty of armed struggle to protect your homeland and the honor of the family and all of that. At this time, they also built like some settlements between my village and Jerusalem, Bisgat Zev. which basically for like a child, I don't need somebody to give me incitements or to read books to be anti-occupation. Than just I see in the real life, the space has shrinking and in danger. Even though there is another Jewish community called Neve Yaakov next to my village, we used to have a good connection with this community, my village and this community. But this was founded in 1920 something. So people don't see it as a settler colonialist like a project. So this is maybe important also in the context of Australia. Yeah, so I end up like doing everything I could, I have my group and was leading the group also and organizing and coffee. Yeah, so also it's fun, I have to say, and be very honest with you. Like as 14 years old, you're the adrenaline, throwing stones at the big army, which is very strong. So for a child, like doing this kind of activism for a child. So I did from throwing stones, Molotov cocktail training in this in a cave, and also I end up at the end wanted to have weapons, guns. So me and a friend from my village, I was 14 and 5 months at this point. This guy's families was their house was demolished, as like about the demolishing houses policy still exists, unfortunately. So he was very angry, and he was not political, or his family. He was older than me. He was like 17 and a half. We attacked 2 Israelis. We stabbed 2 Israelis from Jerusalem. Yeah, well, our intention was to attack them and to take their weapon so we can use it. That was the intention. That's all the plan we had. Yeah, and that's, it ended up with a slightly wounded for the 2 Israelis. And we escaped from the area. Long story short, I ended up in jail with all my group when I was 14 and 5 months. So maybe for your understanding, like usually that's not the normal Israeli jail. It's a military jail because we live under military control. So I've been sent to jail when I was the youngest prisoner for some time. So I became 15 in jail, back and forth to the court, military court, and they sentenced me by 15 years in jail. It's more or less like my age. So many of the prisoners knew me because of that story, actually. In jail as a political prisoner, like this is another second big part of my life was in jail. I grew up in jail from the age of 14 and a half, 14 years and 5 months I spent in jail. During this time, I was also active in jail in Fatah movement, like the prisoners, the political prisoners are divided into different organizations. So I've been active there also, including food hunger strikes, for example. And that's how I got to know about nonviolence for the first time, that nonviolence work. And this is maybe for the conversation. It's very hard to convince people, whether in Australia or Palestinian or Israelis or in academia or anywhere, that nonviolence can work and can achieve anything. It's very hard question. For me, it was practical. From the hunger strikes for 10 days, 15 days, 17 days, which means we don't eat anything, just water and salt. That's why it's called in Arabic and Hebrew, mayo melh, salt and water. It's very famous in our experience. And of course, that's not just like a hunger strike and practical nonviolence tips in jail. We also study, now, today is actually, or yesterday, Nelson Mandela Day. So Nelson Mandela was in jail, and for Palestinian prisoners, he was very important. So we study like Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and our narrative history, and then I studied the Israeli Jewish history narrative. But this is important to say because we talk about narratives, and I guess that apply for many of you maybe. We studied narratives by our eyes, by Palestinian writers. It's a different story than reading by Israeli writers, for example. So I'm just want to say that jail is not a peace academy, it's not a library, big library and a university, it's not. But the prisoners has thought, how can we transform jail from a torture, from humiliating place to raise the spirit of the prisoners to make us stronger than the walls of jail. And this is maybe important for my experience and others, that spiritual strengthen is important here. And I have to say, most of the prisoners were not religious people, but from our culture, you know, like from Abrahamic culture, from the local culture of Sumud, we call it like steadfastness, and from the poetry of Mahmoud Darwish and the songs and the folklore and the music, there are a lot of spiritual resources you have to use to stay strong in jail. If I go like quickly forward, you know, my change, transformation happened during the jail time in a long journey of what we call it like turning the other into a brother. You know, we have it in Judaism. I see religious people here. I guess like you can study this in Judaism, in Islam, and Christianity. We come from a place where all these religions like interacted and come from the same resources. These shared like values are there, and we read this, but that doesn't mean every prisoners come out, you know, like Jesus loving your enemy. That's not exactly how it works, just to be clear. And it takes a long journey, because I want to say one sentence about that, that changing or accepting, opening your heart, your soul, your mind to the other side narrative, which supposedly your enemy, it's a very painful journey, like honesty, because you will have many nights you don't sleep, because for you, like you feel you are a good person, you have conscious, you are standing in the right side of the history, in the right side, which is your side, and it's easier to stay in your side and in your victimhood maybe story. So that's very hard to like get out of it and open to have a multiple complex narrative to carry this in you. It's a very hard mission. I'm not there anymore now, but like through my journey, and I'm using the word journey because it's really a long journey, and like including, if you see a documentary called Disturbing the Peace, at feature Combatants for Peace stories, personal stories. In my story, I seen also a documentary about the Holocaust. This was my first time. Of course, this brings your human part in you, in showing solidarity, even to the one that putting you in jail. And this is the complex, you swim in these complexes. And also to have a strength in the spiritual way, to be stronger than the walls and to feel optimistic while it's complex. I was always optimistic. I got this from my mom, I believe, in my DNA. That's how we live in jail. And for survival needs, we made jokes to stay strong in jail, because there's a lot of violence also, tear gas and torture in jail. It's jail time. It's not like a fancy place to live in, comfortable place, of course. Anyway, so after jail time, I went out of jail in the second Intifada. Like some of my friends involved back in the violence, if you wish, and myself and a few other friends reached the point, actually from jail time, that there is no military solution for this conflict. And this is what unite me and my friends with our Israeli colleagues, partners, alliances that established Combatants for Peace. Because our Israeli partners came from army background, some from like highest units of the Israeli army that killed people, but they reach also the same from practical experience. The Palestinians are here, the Israelis are here to stay, both of us. So there is nowhere to go, and there is no way to defeat each other like by military means. That's in the first level. But for me and for some of us, maybe went much deeper into transformation and nonviolence and change, to really struggle for the freedom and liberation of our peoples in both sides. Because I believe we all in a jail, in a bigger jail, and this system, if we talk about the Israelis, Palestinians specifically, but maybe in the world system nowadays, of being either occupiers or under the occupation, it's not the most comfortable place to be. And so for me, our struggle has really shifted, changed into this liberation for dignity, for freedom, for the right of our peoples to live in freedom in their homeland, with the complexes. I'm aware, very complex when we talk about narrative, and I don't really have arguments or problem on like Jewish connection to the land. And of course, the Palestinian one is much easier to see because it's now and yesterday. For the Jewish connection is much more like complex, like in 2000 years and all this conversation. So I believe both peoples have a legitimate claim to the same stones, the same land, and we have to like really talk about also the power dynamic, because I'm also aware we are not two equal sides. There is the systematical, the system that sit here in the place to serve one community. I believe this is not stable and it's not safe for anybody, and I believe we have to change it for the goodness of everyone. And of course, I believe there is a lot in common here. In short, in Combatants for Peace, we established in 2005, 2006, and common ground on believing in nonviolence, ending the occupation, and also taking responsibility what we did personally in our action. And we create this new community, new narrative to transform also and inspire other people using our personal stories. That's why we always use our personal stories. I think I will stop here. I don't know how much I talk, and give the microphone to my friend Tuli. Tuli, are you there? Jack?
Yeah. Tuli, just unmute yourself.
Okay, I did it. Just did it. Okay, can we make sure that you hear me? Okay. Shukran, Suli. Always a pleasure. So I'm speaking now from Tel Aviv, also because of the corona, and also because I live in Tel Aviv. I have a family in the West Bank, and we're in a disagreement on some of the situations. But let me begin in the beginning and tell you a bit about myself. I'll try to make it short in like 10 minutes, so we'll have time to talk, because I think it's more important that we converse with each other. So I was born in 1967. I'm 52, going on 53 now, when Israel was 19. And when you are born to a very young country, just occupying the West Bank and Sinai and the Golan Heights, the basic thing that you hear is that we are a very small country. We're surrounded by enemies. Arabs are enemies. Palestinians are enemies. And you should go to the army. You want to go to the army in order to protect your country. And this is basically what I grew up with. My bookshelf as a teenager was about army heroes and things that are connected to the army, about groups of kids beating and like winning over Arabs. And that was the situation until all the time. And I still hear this same thing, although I believe that it's a false narrative now. We're a small country, correct? We're surrounded by people that I refuse now to call enemies, because I can see why we were enemies. I can see how we can call ourselves enemies again. But I think that saying we are a small country surrounded by enemies, we are the only democracy in the Middle East, so we are the cottage in the jungle, is basically creating gaps between us. But I was born in Jerusalem, and then my family moved to Holon, which is a suburb of Tel Aviv. And when I was 14, I went to a boarding school in the desert. I think both Sule and I are very fond of the desert, because this is where we find ourselves as free as can be. Suli actually has a desert office that we meet from time to time, and it's been a long time since I was there with you. Anyway, I went to a boarding school where I studied ecology and to become a tour guide, and it was 1981 when I began, no, 1980 when I began studying at the high school, and then went for a gap year. I don't know if you're familiar with that in Australia, a gap year between high school and the army, or high school and university, to volunteer. And I volunteered in a field school, which was located just outside Nablus, Shechem, and I really knew Palestine. My family moved and established a settlement when I was 14 or 15. I was optimistic at the time, because it was the time of the withdrawal from Sinai. And I told them, guys, you're going to be kicked out of that settlement very soon. Why are you doing that? they still are there, and you know the settlement is growing. And when I joined the army in 1985, Israel was deep inside Lebanon, protecting itself from, you know, from what we were told from the Lebanese. And it was natural for me to join the highest, most prestigious unit that I could go to, which was the Golani Brigade. I became a combatant there, and then I went to medic course, and I became a medic, taking care for both sides, because that's, you know, the Hippocratic vow. You take care for your enemies wounded also. And it was before the first Intifada, the first uprising of the Palestinians, and we were quite sure that everything is all right, that there is an occupation. We never called it an occupation. No one, the word was not on our tongues, but still we said to ourselves, if we will be strong enough and we will run an enlightened occupation, which we believed what we are doing, an enlightened, humane occupation, then the Palestinians will reside, they will give up their false hopes for a country, and they will join in to the Zionistic movement, and they will be with us. And it was quite easy to believe in that up till December of 1987, because we were 5 soldiers in the Jabalia refugee camp, 4 or 5 soldiers controlling a huge amount of people, feeling that we can control this. Then 1987 came, December 1987, the first Intifada, and you need to understand that as Israelis, we were shocked because we were not trained in non-lethal weapons. We didn't know what to do with civilians. We were army, when you're in the army. We were also insulted in a way because we were quite sure that we are the good guys around, that we run an enlightened occupations. True, we break into homes, we do things, but it is in order to protect our country, and the Palestinians should understand that they should stop doing that. No one talked about the Palestinian rights, and Suli mentioned the 5 first years of since the Intifada, of the 4 first years, I spent lots of times hunting down people that have dared to wave the Palestinian flag, the 4-colored flag, or to write Palestine on their wall. Many of us did not speak Arabic. I speak not very fluently now, but we didn't speak Arabic, but we could recognize the word Palestine. And when you see that word, it's a banned word, like Voldemort in Harry Potter, and you go and break into that home because this person is a criminal, and you send them to prison for in between a month and 9 months, like administrative prison arrest, without court and without things. And we felt that this is the right thing to do in order to protect ourselves. 1987, as I said, was a shock. So we were very violent at the time because we didn't have any other option. And the meeting between military people, military personnel and civilians is always violent. There isn't any other way around that, unless there's Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese monk, in between them to take it down, to take down the violence. I went to officer school and I became a platoon commander and then a group commander, still in the army, still in the Intifada with the Palestinians. And actually I served 8 years in the compulsory and professional army. At the end of my compulsory army service, I was a group commander, which is like 117 men, spending half the time in Palestine, in the occupied territories, and half the time training. And then I left the compulsory army, and in Israel, I'm sure some of you know, but for those who don't, there's a parallel system for people who've been in the army, especially in combat units, and especially as officers. On the one hand, I had civilian's life. I met my girlfriend, then we got married, we have kids. I went to study psychology and then social work and clinical social work. I'm now writing my PhD in criminology and victimology about the spiritual component of recovering from PTSD. I'm specialist in PTSD treatment, like with various cutting edge methods like EMDR and somatic experiencing and narrative. And this is one part of my life. And the values that I follow are equality, human rights, the self-determination and all that. On the other hand, you have reserve duty, which is up for officers, which is up to in between 60 to 120 days a year, depending if there's a war or not. And on that thing, you put on your uniform, and if you are fortunate, you go to Lebanese border to protect. But most of the time you go to the occupied territories and you do things that are the other way around from all your value system, because you need to protect your country. So I did that until I became a regiment commander. Regiment commander, I was the commander for more than 700 people. The Second Lebanon War, I was in the army with them, and all the other operations up till 2012, where I finished my job there, and I wanted to reside from the reserve duty, but then I was asked to become a mental health officer. I became a mental health officer in the reserve duty for a division which is 25,000 people. And the last war in Gaza, I really hope it will be the last war in Gaza, the protective edge, caught me inside Gaza. It was the very last time that I went inside Gaza in uniform. And I took care it was very different from being a combatant, because as a mental health officer, you go behind the troops like Mother Courage, meeting the wounded, meeting the people that are less fortunate. And they treated more than 350 wounded soldiers with PTSD inside Palestinians' homes. So you see the suffering from both sides. I came out of that war with 3 resolutions. The first one was that I refused to go into the occupied territories or to Gaza with uniform ever again, because something is wrong there, and we are in this conflict for, some would say 52 years, some would say 73 years or more. And the understanding that we will never be strong enough in order to break the idea of people to become free is something that I accept now. The second one was to take care for myself, because treating so many soldiers and being in so many battles since 1985, in Lebanon, in the Intifada first, second, in Gaza Strip during the tunnel wars when Netanyahu opened the tunnels and all that stuff, has taken its toll. And the third one was to look for a movement that would allow me to, first of all, do something right, to try to fix things that I think that are wrong in the region, and to meet the people, because I've seen them. And now that I'm part of the movement, I joined the movement 2014. I was a member of the movement, then I became the head of the Tel Aviv Kalkilia group, which is a group that works together in the region. And then now I'm the Israeli head coordinator of the movement, with a friend from Palestine, Jamil Kassas. I'm delighted to call Suli my friend. And, you know, just for the anecdote, when Suli did what he did in order to get to attain weapon, I was already in the army, and I was chasing after him. Many of the people that are in the movement for the Palestinian side, when we check and compare the dates, we know that we were on the verge of killing each other and hurting each other very much. So, you know, for me, being in Combatants for Peace is also a healing and very spiritual journey, a spiritual journey of healing and being with your enemy and turning him into your frenemy, to your former enemy and now friends. And we are working on a third narrative, neither the Palestinian nor the Israeli, neither the Muslim nor the Jewish. We're trying to make sure that religion would become a solution and not a problem in this region. And the last thing that I would like to say is that, you know, there's this word that everybody is angry at people when they use in comparison to the Palestinian-Israeli situation. It's the word of apartheid. And, you know, we see the apartheid every day. The annexation, and for example, if Suli was a Jewish teenager, even if he would stab someone and kill him, he would never get 15 years in jail. Never, ever. He would be sent into a rehabilitation institute instead of jail. If my friend's Musa Tabib daughter would have been an Israeli daughter, she would hear now because she has a problem in her ears, and they live 15 minutes from my home in Tel Aviv, and the kids there do not get the health care that my daughter get. I have two daughters. One of them was in the army. Luckily for both of us, she wasn't serving in the occupied territories. She served as a jump master, in a paratrooper brigade, teaching soldiers how to jump off planes and get down safely. And our younger daughter, Abigail, is joining now, is going to have her gap year in a school, special school for Bedouin kids down in the south. So she's going to her Sherut Leumi, to her gap year in Nitzana. And we don't know yet about the army. She wants to become a medic because she knows already Palestinian friends, and she wants to be part of the Israeli society. Army is compulsory. She doesn't know yet what she's going to do. And my wife is in the movement also. My mother knows she is in the settlement. My aunts and uncles don't talk to me. My former friends from Golani, some of them talk to me secretly in order to not get criticized as I get. That was 15 minutes.
Okay, no, that was great. All right, thank you. So we have opened up already the chat, and both Tuli and Suli, you can take a look at, field the questions as you see fit. I'm going to ask a question to Tuli first. You mentioned this idea that the Israeli narrative are that we are surrounded by enemies. We are this sheep in a den of wolves. The question that, is that surely historically, from an Israeli point of view, the venom that we have heard sprouted out from, historically, if we go back to 4867, from Egypt, from Jordan, from Lebanon, from Syria, and beyond, to say that we are not surrounded by enemies, I wonder about that. I think that if you hear what comes out from Nasrallah in Lebanon, what we hear coming from Hamas, I appreciate that there are many friends in the Palestinian communities, but to look at that, we are not surrounded by enemies, I find that a bit difficult. Perhaps you could elaborate a little bit more on that.
I'll do it very shortly. We were surrounded by enemies. No one liked the fact that there's a Jewish entity growing up in the Middle East. But just like I think no indigenous people would have liked anyone to come from Europe and build their homes in their lands. Anyway, when you listen, when you really listen, when you go into the exact words of the, I mean, when you talk to Arab leaders, we're not surrounded anymore. There are enemies. There are enemies. But even Nasrallah says very clearly, he says, if you keep on to your borders, we have nothing to argue about. And we have some places that there are more and more with Egypt. We have a cold peace, but we have it. There's a cooperation. With Jordan, we have practical peace. I mean, some of the movement workshops were in Jordan. So what are we left with? Lebanon, which is not a country, and Syria, which fights amongst itself. Yeah, right. The Iranians are saying we're going to bomb you. They're saying that since the Shah was uprooted and Khomeini arrived. We're not surrounded by enemies. And if something, we're a wolf in a den of wolves, not a sheep in a den of wolves. We are the wolf. We know how to be a wolf already. So that's something that when people. And that's why when I was asked by the army after I refused going to the settlements and to the occupied territories anymore, are you willing to still give therapy and teach people in your methods? I said, of course, because if we will be less traumatized, if we will, look for the future and not about, what was done to us and what was done to them, and look for a solution, then people will be less traumatized, more healthy, more happy, and more open to new ideas about, meeting. And, we just had a demonstration in outside Jericho in the place that is about to be annexated. All Israeli politicians are saying is that we don't have any partner and things. I mean, from the right wing. And Jibril am I wrong with the name? Who came over? Jibril Rajoub, Suli. Jibril Rajoub, someone who spent 17 years in jail, came over, and in the demonstration, out in the open, in front of the cameras, with Israelis and soldiers and Palestinians and policemen, broadcasted to all the world. We are here to make peace. We understand that you will not go away and we will not go away. We're looking for a solution to make peace. This is a minister in the Palestinian Authority, a minister that lives in Jericho, and so there are people that want to make. I mean, I was 10 when Sadat landed in Israel. We did not believe that it's going to happen. We were sure that he's going to explode inside Tel Aviv. But still, we have peace with Egypt. So basically, we need to move from this victimization way of thinking. And let me quote Rabbi Dessler, who wrote the wonderful book, A Letter to Eliyahu, who said, the man moves from self-centered to God-centeredness, from being a victim to being someone who helps the world and looks for God. So the movement between self-centeredness, I'm a sheep in a den of wolves, to I'm here with my equals that have equal right, is a movement from my point of view, from self-centeredness, earthly way of seeing, to a more divine way of seeing and more spiritual way of seeing. And it took a lot of time, so I'll give it to Suli. But thank you for the question.
Yeah. Shall I look at the questions? Maybe comment on
some? I'd like to ask one also, just based on some of the difficulties in bringing combatants for Peace here to Sydney this evening, that you know that there have been changes in program and all these kinds of things. So one of the issues here is that there's some part of the Jewish community that argues that for an organization to refer to Palestine as a country under Israeli occupation, which is a quote from your website, taken out of context, plays fast and loose with the truth and gives out a damaging and inaccurate message. And that further, it makes it more difficult for peace because it places all the blame on Israel and none on, PA and Hamas. Now, so that's kind of like where part of the Jewish community is coming from. Could you elaborate on Combatants for Peace and their ideas for peace, and also the other big bugaboo is its stand on BDS? Now, by the way, I've read the website, so I know what your position is, but I think for the, the people.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Yeah, and thank you, Jeffrey. And I also read the questions that some of them are, you collected them together. So let me say this. We, in our talk, we basically said that in Combatants for Peace, we do highlight and agreed on and talk about the power dynamic. So we know it's not two equal sides fighting each other. That's not really the case. By saying this is not really to victimize the Palestinian and to blame the Israelis. Like, the blaming game is something that's not helpful for us, and that's not our method actually. And as I spoke, like, our joint nonviolent struggle is really to free and liberate our peoples in all sides. Let's put it this way. And we do it jointly and non-violently. Of course, this brings a lot of challenges because the mainstream in all sides are not happy with that, not just in the Jewish community in Australia. Also, if you spoke to a Palestinian community here or elsewhere, or to Israelis that lives inside Israel or outside, of course, any new ideas, if I take like even the Irish conflict between two white Christian communities, also the normalization thing, like with the enemy, coming together with the enemy, is not something accepted. In South Africa, in any conflict zone, that's normally, it's very hard to break the taboos and the red lines of this side and that side and come together. So that's really important as context to understand this, especially when we started Combatants for Peace. It was the middle of the Second Intifada. Not easy to come together while the violence was in a rise. And since then, just to mention that Combatants for Peace does open and include people that were not fighting, whether Israelis or Palestinian that were not like in the same profile of ex-prisoners. So we had women in the organizations also which take less fighting part in the conflict, and other young members that not exactly from this profile. This is important to mention. So
Sully, there's a lot of background noise. Give me 2 seconds. I'm not sure if it's yours. Yeah, I think it's your mic. There's a lot of background noise coming. Just try unmute yourself. Try it again.
Mm-hmm. Is that good now?
Better. Yeah, it's just a lot of background noise.
Yeah. So I want to say, like, in my experience and how we understand things in Combatants for Peace, two things important to say: that not everybody in Combatants for Peace think the same. Like, of course, within the organization, like in every other community, we had like arguments about the political solution and other things always. That's normal. And we are happy with that. We don't want, nobody knows the truth and one way and one quick way to achieve peace between both sides. That's not easy task, in any conversation. With that said, there are some principles that unite us, which is basically the umbrella of joint nonviolent struggle. And this umbrella and this model, there are other models. I'm not saying our model is the only good model here. There are other models. Other people believe also in peace and nonviolence and working together in different models. You hosted, like I've been in touch already with you and Rabbi Gad about like the other organizations that you hosted that believe in a model of dialogue, which is important. Some organizations believe in model of solidarity with the struggle led by Palestinians as the one live under the occupation. There are different models here. In our model, let's me call it this way, we show a bit of tolerance to other non-violent models, and we try not to involve in interior attacks among the different groups, because we believe really in coalition building, and that's why many of our activities that we do, and somebody here asked what we do practically, we'll tell you also about that. We do it usually like the last demonstration against the annexation, it was joined by 10 Palestinian and Israeli organizations. Some of them are joint, some of them, they work in one side, but they agree on the principles. And of course, it's a big task to bring different groups together. For example, we can talk about the Memorial Day, the Palestinian-Israeli Joint Memorial Day. This is the biggest event ever happened in joint and online, thanks to Corona. Last year, we had 10,000 people in the place when we had the Memorial Day. Typically, this is an Israeli event, Yom HaZikaron. But in Combatants for Peace and the Family Forum and other groups that alliance with us, we started the event almost 13, 14 years ago with 100 people, 200 people, 500 people. And if we talk about numbers, though that's not really my thing to talk about numbers, we grow into thousands. This year, we broadcast it online around the world, and we have 170,000 people watching the broadcast online. Of course, many Palestinians, many Israelis, and many around the world, because we believe our message is also human, and this cause, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, is important to many people in the world, for good and bad. I just want to say here on the political level, which is, we started like as many organizations after Oslo, like under the slogan of typical classical two-state solution. That's honestly the truth. In 2005-06, that was the story. Through the years, with the slowly death of the two-state solution, some of our focus has changed. The reality has changed. The settlements has been grown, which not enable any future Palestinian state of any kind. And also because of many criticism of Oslo Accord and so many things. So some of our people has changed their ideas. So in order to stay united, which is not easy, we decided to, like go to the roots of the conflict and support the right of self-determination for all the communities that lives from the river to the sea. I would say and argue, firstly, we have to recognize the people that lives from the river to the sea, whether Palestinian or Israelis, are equal by nature. If we agree in this, then the political solution will be much easier. There's a lot of political solutions out there, like two-state, one homeland, federation. There are many like ideas, but there is not really recognition of the identities that exist in this land. And as Tuli mentioned, the trauma healing, like since we talk about collective trauma here and the long conflict, we really need to recognize each other, like just the humanity as individuals, but also the rights as groups, as communities. And then the political solution will be much easier. And that's where we focus, and we focus really on the grassroots level, bringing people together, both using dialogue and direct action activism. That's why we do a lot of demonstrations that's nonviolent. And actually, like because of the Corona now, we do a lot of this kind of Zooming and lectures and talks. I was asked to speak and I asked to bring Israeli partner, because this is one of our main principles, is the partnership, and the shared of power here is important, because in our context, that's not obvious. Usually the Israelis are more in power. That's the reality as a fact. It's not just my opinion. So we have learned a lot through the journey that working together is not just building personal, love and relationship, which is important, I think, but also as a group dynamic. It's important to learn to live with these differences, with the challenges, with the different cultures, and work through things together. Thank you.
I want to say that we also, what we do is we try to rebuild things that were demolished. We try to, there's a group that escorts shepherds in the Jordan Valley in order to protect them from the attacks by settlers. We rebuild water systems and water holes because Israel is the one and only country in the world that you're not allowed to collect water. You're not allowed to collect water in order for your agriculture, and it's definitely a law that was that was banned, that was made. They passed this bill in order to make the life harder for non-Israeli and non-Jewish farmers, because it's not restricted. It's not being pulled over in Israel, but only in Palestine. And what we try to do is we try to change, the hearts, and to make sure that people know that on the other side there are people that want to meet them. And when I was young, I met a lot of Palestinians because there wasn't any separation wall. Now there is. My daughter's friends have never met Palestinians, although we live like 2 minutes from each other. So basically, the one state, two state, non-state. I think Mthuli and me believe in non-state solution, but people don't agree with that now. But we don't know. We will support any solution that would make sure that these principles will be kept: equality, human rights, and self-determination. Whenever we get confused, we check. What do we believe in? Oh, these are the things that we believe in. So do we believe that everyone should have education? Yes. Do we believe that everyone should have equal ability to get healthcare or education or water? For me, it really is infuriating when I think about the fact that in Jericho, people get 100 liters a day for each person, whereas in the settlements around Jericho, they get 400 liters a day from the same wells. So when you try to separate, when you begin separating the populations by religion or by origin, then you know that you're wrong.
All right, there's a lot of discussion that is happening here in the chat. Some of it is a bit intense. I don't know if Suli, we've got a couple of more minutes, and we can take one more question before we wrap up. I'm happy to hand over for you to decide which ones. A lot of discussion happening.
Suli.
Yeah, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Look, I just have a quick look at the chat. Of course, this is normal, expected that people, with a cause that's close to their heart will go, on all directions. None of us has the perfect formula to make everybody's happy, and that's not our goal anyway. And whether with you as a group or even our families and our communities, we also got criticized and attacked all the time. I mean, socially and social media, and sometimes even physically and threats. Because what we are talking about is really not staying in our comfortable zone. And the easiest thing for our life is to stay in the comfortable zone, like everyone in their own narrative, in the consensus of the mainstream, and that's the easiest place. That's not our choice as individuals that choose really to struggle for justice, for freedom, for dignity, for better life for people here and for the land here and elsewhere. And in that struggle, which is long, I'm even personally not focused on the whatever called the end goal. I was just reading about Lewis, the guy that died yesterday from the human civil rights movement that died in the US yesterday. I just posted on my Facebook that this is and I really relate to this a lot. It's not struggle of 1 day, 1 week, 1 year. It's a long life struggle because it's a very deep cause that that nobody knows like a easy formula I wish it was just like one thing, like quickly, and we are like in a peaceful utopia. That's not the case. So we, as a friend said, we keep one leg in the reality and one leg in the vision and the dream that carry a lot of hope. And for me personally, I think what I learned in jail, in my experience in that joint struggle, it's very important to stay optimistic despite all the challenges that comes all the time. For example, the annexation right now, for example, this put all the efforts of all the peace organizations, including Combatants for Peace, or even the one that maybe does dialogue, and is here in a question among our peoples, like what you have been done, look what they're doing, there is no partner on the other side, we want peace, they don't want peace. This is always the case. I'm not making the two sides as equal. We are talking, people are equal, but the system is built on separation and serving one side. So for people that said that we are blaming one side and the other side is a victim, that's not really exactly our intention, rather than to say there is a power dynamic here. And I think when we talk about power dynamic, it's easy to agree that one side carry a lot of power in this conflict. The other side, which is the Palestinian side, is not just a victim. I think, and I would say this, and this is also controversial, the Palestinian has the power of legitimizing the Jewish state. Take it wherever you want. That's my experience. There is not so much questions for me as for Palestinian of legitimacy of being here, honestly. I don't sleep and like feel, oh, my family have been here for centuries. So I don't have this question. I have many Israeli friends. I know Hebrew. I speak Hebrew also. And also I care about my Israeli partners and future neighbors. And I know this is different for the Israelis, the legitimacy question, which is beyond power and force. And for us, the deep healing of this conflict is really to legitimize the belonging of all these sides, Palestinian and Israelis, to this place, and how we share the resources. Like if Tule spoke about water, I can, from my family experience, I live in area A, my family live in area C, near Jerusalem, has been born in Jerusalem, lived in Jerusalem all their life, but they can't go to Jerusalem, literally, which is 10 minutes from my family house, without Israeli permit, which is complicated to get because of the separation wall, the checkpoint system, and the whole occupation system that's in the place. Even my family land, where we used to do a lot of agriculture, as I spoke at the beginning, my mom got a permit once a year in October for the olive harvest. And you know, I can tell you, not for just a human, I know many people care about environment and nature. Even the trees are dying because you can't just go eat once a year from the trees. You have to work them through the year, through the seasons. This cultural life and economy is destroyed. So we can't use the land that we inherited from our ancestors. And you know, the culture has changed also in Australia and the world. You know, like my ancestors used to say, we don't own the land, we belong to the land. But that changed in the last centuries everywhere. Maybe our generation will bring this into life again, that we really respect the land, respect the resources that in the land, respect the human life, and we live in a bit more fair system that more people are happy with than minority or a small group of people that controlling our life. I even forget about the Middle East. Look at the US now and worldwide with the Black Lives Matter and a lot of Western like culture and systems that has to be revised and think about, because I believe we are all connected. So just finish to say that I'm optimistic to stay firmly in our belief in the moral values, and that's where we struggle, not on the exact like a plan of how to divide the land and the people and separation. I believe in engagement. I think our experience in Combatants for Peace teached us a lot of experiences that we share through these lectures and writing books and the movies. Like my friends from the founding members of Combatants for Peace, for me is like a family. That was not the case the first years, for example. And now when I talk with you, with Tuli, like we don't talk as Israeli Palestinian. We kind of practicing beyond these psychological and practical barriers. And that's, we have to hold this space with all the challenges that comes from around us.
I agree with every word, and you know, I join in, and it's always moving to hear Suli. And I would just say that for me, it's not a struggle; it's a journey. It's a journey. It's a spiritual, psychological belief system, and valued journey. And we invite everyone to join in. We really invite everyone to join in, write us, ask more questions. An hour to talk about this is like, you know, we talk about it for like 140 years now.
Anyway, so Suli and Tuli, thank you so much for this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear from both of you. It concludes this, I hope for all of you, a fascinating and at times confronting conversations we have in over the last 5 weeks. The real goal was to show that there are people on both sides of the political divide who want peace and are actively working towards it. And I think the way that Suli and Tuli said it over there, that to be able to stop looking about the technicalities of how's it going to work, but let's just look to the other side as people, as humans that have the same desires as us, the same wants, the same longing for dignity, for safety, and for freedom. And if we can all work together, slowly by slowly, we create this groundswell of peace initiatives that are happening. As we can see, we only met 5 of them, but there's a groundswell of peace and support. And we should all be looking not to be, and this for me was very difficult, not to be pro-Israel, not to be pro-Palestine, but to be pro-peace. That we are, as the Jewish community, we love Israel, we are Zionists, we are passionate about it, but our passion is for peace. We have to be working towards it. And sometimes it means we're going to have to look at some of the ugly underbelly of our own narrative. So to that end, I'd like to thank my partner this evening and for the last 5 weeks, Rabbi Kamens. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I'm going to sign off, Rabbi Kamens, if you'd like to sign off for yourself.
Rabbi Krebs, thank you very much. And Suleiman and Tuli, thank you again tonight, one and all. We'll continue this one way or another.
Amen. Laila Tov, everybody. Look forward to the next course. Please, God, not too far away. Thank you, everybody. Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.